Good evening. My name is Brother Dave Gillarm. I'll be your host for the night. I am a past master of Mount Pisgah Lodge number 53, located in Columbus, Georgia, where Brandon Durr serves as our worshipful master. I also had the pleasure of serving as the worshipful grand historian of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia, where the Honorable Corey Shackelford Sr. serves as our 18th most worshipful Grand Master. Brother Caffey couldn't be with us tonight. He wasn't quite feeling quite well. So keep him in your prayers. And I'm sure he'll be back for the next show. As always, the views and opinions that are expressed by us tonight in no way reflect the views and opinions of the lodges and grand lodges in which we hold membership. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and move into have the other panelists introduce themselves. Then we get into the purpose of our show. Brother Damian Jack.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Brother Damian Jack, proud past master of Paul Drayton Lodge number 7 in Charlotte, North Carolina, where Brother Lonnie McBride serves as our worshipful master. Our lodge is a constituent lodge under the auspices of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of North Carolina, where the Honorable Daniel L. D.T. Thompson serves as our 24th most worshipful Grand Master. Once again, it's an honor and pleasure to be before you this evening. Definitely looking forward to the topic of this show and pray that you enjoy.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Prince Hall Think Tank. Welcome to January 2021. I'm so glad to be here. My name is James R. Morgan III, and I am a proud past master of Corinthian Lodge number 18, which is presided over by none other than Worshipful Master Davian Gregory. My lodge is a constituent lodge of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia here in the nation's capital. We won't get into it tonight, but we've had some interesting times here in the nation's capital as of late. But I'm so glad to be back here on the Prince Hall Think Tank here in 2021. I can't believe I can say that. And I'm just thrilled to be here.
All right. Thank you, sir, Brother Morgan and Brother Baptista.
Brother Steven Baptista. I'm a member of Union Lodge number 4, subordinate to the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge, Massachusetts, Timothy R. Downs, most worshipful Grand Master. I should say Bradley D. Nelson is my worshipful master at Union Lodge number 4. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you for that, Brother Batista. The purpose of tonight's show is to talk about your book, Artifacts of the Old African Lodge. One of the I guess the most well talked about items in Prince Hall history is Prince Hall and African Lodge itself. And so anytime that there's a book or article or anything written about or spoken about Prince Hall or African Lodge, we take it to heart. It comes very precious to us. So for all the viewers out there, I saw plenty of people posting that they had purchased the book, and some had already started to dig into it, and I've heard nothing but great comments about the book itself. So with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and go right to Brother Baptista, and to give us kind of overview, like what was your motivation, what was the purpose, how did you compile the information, everything about this book.
The purpose for me was relatively simple, in that being I'm a difficult individual. I particularly don't like the term "I don't know," and it's okay to not know, but I found it difficult when I was having discussions with people I perceived in to be the authority on the topic, and when I would ask, "What's the story with this? What can you tell me about this artifact here?" And in a lot of cases, I don't know or very minimal information. It really got me curious. My curiosity originally began in my lodge, I think. My lodge is I know we all say it, but my lodge is a very historic lodge. We had a number of members who served in the 54th Regiment. The chaplain of the 54th was the chaplain of my lodge, and he was the first commissioned Black officer in the U.S. Army. And hearing those stories as a young entered apprentice, it really got me curious about So wow, what are these stories? I'm getting these bits and pieces. There's got to be really something epic behind it. And the more I started to delve into it, I started to realize, wow, there's really some incredible stories that I can't believe weren't being shared, and that kind of hurt that they weren't being shared. And kind of the final reason I did it was because I could. And I know that sounds a little sarcastic, but I think it means a lot to be able to do it. And kind of the point I wanted to show, not just Prince Hall Masons, but the public at large, is you can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. I'm not a scholar per se. I didn't attend a college. I don't have a degree. I don't have a lot of the background to do what I did, but I wanted to do it. I wanted it out there. I wanted to clarify some of the myths. I wanted to share some beautiful stories. And that's the thing I'll always come back to is in Prince Hall Masonry, what I've found in the time that I've been a Prince Hall Mason is there is a tremendous amount of beautiful stories that are worthy of sharing. Hear me out here. I'm kind of sick of talking about Prince Hall. And I don't mean that as a slight. I don't mean it as a dig. He's the founder of our society. It's the reason we're gathered here this evening. But he's also an individual we know very little about. We know a lot about Nero Prince. I don't know why we haven't, had a really big discussion about Nero Prince or some of the other masters that followed Prince Hall, because we do know quite a bit about them. So I'm not saying knowing about Prince Hall is unimportant, but what I'm saying is there's a legacy after Prince Hall, and we need to talk about that legacy that follows Prince Hall.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that, Brother Baptista. And, when you first communicated with me about this topic and said, you were looking to go to print with it, I thought it was very fascinating. I actually had a conversation with my Grandmaster, the Honorable Quincy Gant, who was very interested in the topic, in the sense of, we've had a number of books come out in the past, and I think we talked previously about William Grimshaw a few episodes back, and one of the concerns that I won't say it was a concern he had, but it was something that he just kind of threw out there and said, how secure are we in the information that you've put out there? Because it's a very interesting book, and there's a lot of things in it. It's not a long book, but there's a lot of things in there that we haven't heard before, right? So can you talk a little bit about your research process and how you were able to validate some of the information that you were able to get into?
I'm going to answer your question with a question first. Have you ever closed your eyes and thrown a dart at a dartboard? Because that's what history research feels like 9 out of 10 times. I've always said I don't think I'm a good historian. I think I'm a darn lucky person. I will say, in all sincerity, the biggest advantage we have as historians that a lot of our predecessors didn't was the internet. I feel really bad. We had a historian in our lodge who was also a grand historian, past master Randall B. Pollard, and he pored over the minutes of our lodge for years. He brought them home and he went over every page, and after he brought the minutes back to the lodge for me to go through them, he passed away shortly after, and I went through the minutes, and I knew by looking at them there was a lot he couldn't read. I photographed all of the minutes. I brought them home. I was able to bring them into Photoshop, and I was able to manipulate the images to change the contrast and things to read some of these pages. So I know he missed quite a bit of the history of our lodge, and he unfortunately went to his grave without knowing a lot of those things. He had identified, I believe, 4 members of our lodge that served in the 54th, and after going through the minutes, I got that up to 7. Because of digital technology. A lot of what I found for the book was through internet resources using services available like newspapers.com, Genealogy Bank, Ancestry.com. They're incredible resources, and I really don't think anybody should hesitate to use those.
Thank you for that. And speaking about lodge minutes, I guess it's for the other historians out there. Like my lot, I'm pretty sure your lodge minute is probably a lot older than mine. My lodge minutes go back to December 1891, and the handwriting and everything is still impeccable. It's like, we're looking at it. It looks like it's from 1891. It's like they just finished writing it. It's still in perfect condition. For those that for your example, you said you had minutes that you had to do other things to manipulate to read them. Like, what are some of those tools that you would suggest using to help other researchers be able to read documents that are probably like not so in perfect condition?
First and foremost, if you have any documents, at least to up until probably the early 1900s, I would photograph them. Depending on how brittle the pages are, flatbed scanners are really nice. But I think taking a photograph, especially nowadays where everybody has a camera on their phone, is appropriate. More importantly than photographing your minutes, though, to be able to have that digital copy and be able to manipulate them if you need to read them, more importantly is preserve your written minutes. The first chapter of the book, I talk about fires at the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in Massachusetts. My lodge had a significant fire in 1970. Our lodge was burned down, actually. It was during a period of racial tension in the city, and that's how they lashed out, and they burned the lodge down, and we lost everything. And then very recently, Christmas Day, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Rhode Island burned down, and it really saddened me to read an article in the newspaper where one of the Grand Lodge officers was talking to the reporter and said, "We lost all our paper records." So that hurts, because that's literally how we make our history disappear. I don't know that there are brothers that are still with us who remember a lot of those times and can put pen to paper and recreate those stories. But we do have to take extraordinary steps to preserve what we have.
Outstanding. Thank you. And I don't want to, I guess, get into the meat and potatoes. I don't want to get too far into your book, because people got to read it. Okay, can't give them all the cow's milk. But one of the first things that you talk about is something that, honestly, as with me in our PHA historian group, like, you blew my mind away when you talked about the fires.
You can say it. Two fires.
Yeah, two fires. So myself and past Master Curtis Black, who's a former panelist, we had talked about that in the past, and did stuff. I think me and James had talked about it. We knew for a fact that fire happened in 1869. Without an absolute doubt, that fire happened. We knew that. And then when you was like, okay, well, there was actually two fires. Like, hold up, what you talking about? So talk us through that research in that first chapter of the book.
Lewis Hayden, I have this discussion all the time. I'm kind of surprised Lewis Hayden isn't more well known, not just in the Prince Hall community, but to the public at large. I am a Lewis Hayden fanboy, and I will go to my grave a Lewis Hayden fanboy. He did so much, not only for Prince Hall Masonry, but also for society. So I was digging through a lot of what Lewis Hayden wrote. He was a prolific author. He authored a number of pamphlets. And he addressed the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in an address titled Grand Lodge Jurisdictional Claim or War of Races. And in that, he pauses momentarily and thanks a brother by the name of William B. Kendall for saving the charter and the records from a fire. And what kind of blew my mind was going back and looking at the date when Lewis Hayden gave this address, this address predates the 1869 fire. And that really sparked my interest in why is Lewis Hayden talking about a fire that hadn't happened for a year and a half yet. And I had to look. I had to find out more. I think the most shocking revelation that I encountered in the story was that this first fire, the one that happened prior to 1869, was in past Grandmaster William B. Kendall's house. He was the sitting Grandmaster at the time. Apparently, that's where the African Lodge met. And I've said to other brothers, I couldn't imagine being in that position where my house is burning, and he was a family man, married, and had a child. And you have to make that choice. Am I going to save my possessions, or am I going to save these records of African Lodge?
So I want to be clear about something. Not only is that a fascinating story, not only is that a heroic story and one that we should all remember, but I want to be clear about the fact that William B. Kendall, W.B. Kendall, is not, W and B is not the same as S and T. And I think you know where I'm going with this. Those are different. Those are 4 different letters. Am I right? Are y'all following?
I don't know where the S and T ever came from. Again, Lewis Hayden was clear using his full name, William B. Kendall. Later on, I believe it was Emmanuel Sullivan who addressed it at the 100th anniversary of the granting of the warrant to African Lodge. He just says Kendall. But what really helped me there was the National Grand Lodge records. The National Grand Lodge records for 1855 show William B. Kendall of Massachusetts as the Grand Master of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. So as far as clarifying the William B. versus the ST, I think that was clarified a long time ago. And it's kind of unfortunate to have to clarify it today.
Wow. I think that's powerful.
But back to what you were saying, that's kind of the point I was making earlier, is that there are so many names and so many stories that haven't been brought to light that somebody like past Grandmaster William B. Kendall certainly needs to be recognized for what he did. Again, we wouldn't be having this conversation this evening if it wasn't for him.
That was awesome, Brother Jack.
Yes. My question for you, Brother Baptista, the one thing that we always talk about when we bring authors on, and James and I have spoken about this when we presented at the Philaxis Convention last year, is that whenever you publish a work and you put out a work, or even when you give a lecture or give some type of speech or put out any type of information, you pretty much make yourself vulnerable, vulnerable to critiques, criticisms, and things of that nature. Was that when you get ready to put this work out, was that being vulnerable one of your major concerns? And if not, what were some concerns you had prior to putting out this work?
The only real concern that I had prior to publication was how to fire up, particularly the members of the Prince Hall community. How can I get brothers interested in learning a little bit more about their history? Because when I say history, I see a lot of brothers' eyes glass over. I took history in school. That's boring. All I'm doing is memorizing names and dates. And I think it's the task of a historian to manipulate that a little bit, that sentiment, and have it more understood as this is your heritage. This is your lineage. You know who your parents are. You know who your grandparents are. You may know who your great grandparents are. You hear stories of your family growing up. I don't know why it should be any different with the fraternity we're members of. I think you're duty bound to understand a portion of your history, and there are brothers who take it further and they want to know a little bit more in detail. So having said that, the November episode of the Prince Hall Think Tank entirely changed the way I published the book. So thank you all. Because in that conversation towards the end of the episode, I believe it was Brother John Williams who had said that one of the biggest issues we're tackling in Prince Hall Freemasonry is that it's hard to get brothers to read, especially when you're asking a brother to read about history. So I wanted to narrow it down to what I felt were the most interesting stories of African Lodge 459, but more importantly, to keep it relatively brief. I don't want to intimidate anybody with sticker shock on a very expensive book. I didn't want to intimidate anybody with the page count. So it's a relatively short book. It's a relatively quick read. I'd like to believe I did a halfway decent job of keeping all of the pertinent information in there, but I wanted to make sure it was relatively short because I think these are important parts of our history, and I kind of want to take away as many excuses as possible in regards to having that exposure to some of these stories.
Excellent. Brother Baptista, anybody who looks at the cover of the book will see your name there, but they'll also notice my name at the top there, since you were kind enough to ask me to write the foreword, and I was very honored that you did that. One of the things that I made sure to note in there is that your book, in my view, is very unique in that where a lot of us have chosen to focus on history from a perspective of people and personalities and telling historical narrative that way, you chose a different path in terms of you still obviously looking at people, but you're also dealing with objects and artifacts, hence the name of the book. You're dealing with artifacts of our history, which is something I don't think that's really been done before. Honestly, I don't know that anyone has ever really done, even in local, even here, in my jurisdiction. What was it about that angle and these artifacts that made you say, okay, people need to know about this. People need to know that this object is here, whether it's Prince Hall's apron, whether it's a punch, whatever. What was it that really got you revved up to talk about the objects themselves?
My first visit to my Grand Lodge as a newly raised Master Mason was for the annual session. And for some reason, I don't recall why, there were photographs of the charter. The charter itself wasn't out, but there were some photographs of the charter that were out. And I think it was my first time really looking at the charter of African Lodge 459. And I recall asking, what the heck happened to this charter? Something happened. It looks burnt. It looks crinkled. It looks warped. And I got the response, well, there was a fire at the Grand Lodge. And I had to know more about that because, that document is our lineage. That's all of our lineage. Everything comes from that document. So that's how I kind of started to look at it, was the people are gone. Prince Hall's been gone a long time. Nero, Prince, everybody else, they've been gone. But those artifacts are still around. And kind of how you worded it in the forward, James, is they have a voice. You just have to be prepared to listen, because we hold these artifacts in great reverence. The charter for African Lodge is sandwiched between bulletproof glass. It's kept in a vault when it's on display for the symbolic reopening of African Lodge 459. It's literally under armed guard. So why is it so important? Why is it so revered? And as you asked, Brother Morgan, if it could talk, what would it say? Same thing with Prince Hall's apron, which is, I think, much less known than the charter. People know about the Minutes of African Lodge, of course. But even the minutes, they tell a story beyond what's written in them. They have their own voice and they have their own story about their survival. And I think that's kind of what it boils down to. It's about survival. As I alluded to earlier, it's a plague upon the fraternity, this thing called fire. It happens with more frequency than I think a lot of people understand. And we've lost more to fire probably than anything else. My lodge has been having very serious conversations, especially after the fire in Rhode Island, about what are we going to do as a lodge to preserve what we have for the next generation. Because I want to make sure, even though I may not be around and the other brothers of the lodge may not be around now, that the voice contained in those objects will continue to speak. But again, we have to be very patient and we have to be very quiet and we have to pause and we have to listen to what these artifacts have to say.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And let me just take this time just real quick to publicly say, although I wrote that forward and I'm those were my words, you did an excellent job in framing this whole conversation for us. You did an excellent, remarkable job, my brother. Very proud of you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We're getting to some other stuff. I know you had a presentation to do as well. I've been in all kind of archives and some everywhere. The most mind-blowing thing that I've ever put my hands on was Thornton Jackson's pistol. That still blows me away that I was actually able to hold Thornton Jackson's pistol. So when it comes to African Lodges archives and the things that still exist, is there one thing that just blew your mind away once you start researching it?
Prince Hall's apron. I'm getting emotional now. To be able to go into that room and to pick it up and hold it, that really meant something to me because, again, we talk about lineage. You can't go further back than Prince Hall when you talk about our fraternity. To acknowledge that this is the lambskin that was around his waist, that this is what he wore as he presided over African Lodge. I knew that was really something special. And again, it's just one of those things where I don't know why previous attention wasn't really called to it. I know brothers who have made pilgrimages to go see George Washington's apron on display, and I've kind of questioned, would brothers pilgrimage to see Prince Hall's apron on display? But yeah, being in the presence of Prince Hall's apron, to be that close to it, after looking at it behind glass for years, that meant a lot to me.
Literally, I think right now in our audience, you probably got Prince Hall Masons around the world who are jealous of you, Brother Baptista. I want you to enjoy this moment.
And for those who don't know,
I'm one of them. I know I'm one of them.
For those who don't know, that is the cover of the book. The cover of the book is a portion of Prince Hall's apron. That's the center of his apron. The square compasses and the laurels above it. And I know a lot of people haven't been that close to it and haven't been able to really appreciate it. So that's why it had to be the cover, so that just from a glance you can see, that's Prince Hall's apron.
Right. And I've been to the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge in Massachusetts building. And for those who haven't, they do have an exhibit set up. And I've seen the aprons that are on display there. And at the time, I know that I assumed that those were African Lodge aprons and that might be Prince Hall's apron, but I didn't know. And so the fact that you were able to go back and document that, and you actually have, thank God you have a chapter called the Provenance, right? I think that's very powerful. It's very powerful that not only do we have it, but you're able to show the where it's been, who's had it. I think that's a really fascinating story. For those who get the book, you'll get to see that.
And that's the interesting part of history, is that it's a trickle down. And what I mean by that is, and again, not wanting to give away too much, but the apron being at the Prince Hall Grand Lodge now is a direct result of the fires that took place. It's all one continuous story where you realize everything's relatively consequential. So there was the fire in 1855 that burned the records and the charter, and those were rescued by past Grand Master Kendall. At the time of the second fire, the records were not in the building, and I want to be clear about that. The charter was not in the building. The minutes were not in the building. The apron was not in the building. They had been moved off site. When Prince Hall's apron came to African Lodge, because African Lodge didn't retain Prince Hall's apron, his spouse did. And from the spouse, it was passed on to her daughter. We can get into that in a moment if you guys like. And she brought it back to the Prince Hall Grand Lodge. And when she brought her stepfather's apron to the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, that's when I think particular interest was cast upon everything else from African Lodge. What I wasn't aware of, and what kind of threw me for a loop, was apparently after the formation of the National Grand Lodge, the artifacts of the African Lodge didn't mean as much to the Prince Hall Grand Lodge. They had a new charter under the National Grand Lodge. So to use the words of Hamilton Smith, past Grand Master of DC and son of John James Smith of Massachusetts, he said they were discarded. So his father brought them home, and the apron, the minutes, and the charter stayed in his home for 30 years. And when the Prince Hall Grand Lodge dedicated the monument to Prince Hall at Copp's Hill in Boston, is when Brother John J. Smith gave the apron and the minutes back to African Lodge. The Prince Hall Grand Lodge. He had returned the charter slightly earlier for, ironically enough, the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the granting of the warrant to African Lodge.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's interesting you mentioned that about the column, because I wrote a paper about that for college. And it's been part of my thing. And now on April 3rd, we're going to erect a column for William E. Terry, who was supposed to have received one on July 1st, 1901. And then looking at researching Prince Hall's column for everybody out there to understand, Prince Hall died in 1807. The column that everybody, including myself, take a picture of when we go to his grave, it wasn't erected until 1895. And then to have John J. Smith at his grave wearing Prince Hall's apron, I mean, I couldn't even imagine that. It just brings it's like some type of feeling to think that, after all these years, the last living member of African Lodge shows up wearing Prince Hall's apron. I couldn't.
That's amazing.
I couldn't imagine being in the crowd and seeing that.
That's amazing.
And then after the ceremony, they had a collation at Faneuil Hall. And at the collation is when he presented to the Grand Lodge the records book that he had maintained and the Prince Hall's apron. And that's why the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts has those artifacts to this day, because of the diligence of Brother John James Smith.
Now, I want to throw a monkey wrench in this conversation. This is a beautiful moment, and I agree that must have been a beautiful scene. But you said that when Prince Hall died, his spouse had the apron, and then a
Stepdaughter.
Yeah. Wait a minute. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that's something that a lot of folks that we haven't heard before. Once again, can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that was the most shocking revelation of my work. I think it stopped me from doing work for a good 2 weeks because I couldn't believe it. To clarify some history momentarily, the fact that Prince Hall married Sylvia shouldn't be a shock to anybody. This information came out in the 1970s in Prince Hall Life and Legacy. We have the record of Sylvia executing the estate upon Prince Hall's death, her name, her signature. So we all know there was a woman named Sylvia Hall that Prince Hall had married. And through looking through the publicly available records up in Boston of births, deaths, marriages, etc. I was completely shocked and blown away to find there was another member of that household. And that other member of the household was Sylvia's daughter from a previous relationship. And her name was Clarissa. And after Prince Hall died, Clarissa and Sylvia relocated to May Street in Boston. And I'd really like to know more about that property because just a few years later, I don't discuss it too much in the book, but I do put I did put the newspaper clipping in the book that there was an auction for a parcel of land, and when they were describing the boundaries of the parcel of land on May Street, it said something to the effect of it ends at the parcel that was formerly owned by Prince Hall. So I find that very interesting that Prince Hall was also likely a property owner. So they lived in that home together until Sylvia passed, and Clarissa, it's presumed anyways, took charge of what her mother had, and in her declining years, in her late 70s, is when she it was after the annual session. As a matter of fact, Lewis Hayden reelected as Grand Master of Massachusetts. She made a presentation to the lodge. She presented a punch bowl that it says it was what I found interesting, the wording, brought to this country by Prince Hall, along with his apron and his gavel that he used to preside over African Lodge. I do talk about the gavel a little bit in the book. Unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, the gavel was lost to history. We haven't seen it or heard about where it might be. But that too was in the possession of John J. Smith for a number of years and was publicly shown anytime African Lodge had a big event. Again, particularly the celebration of the granting of the charter for the 100th anniversary, the gavel was displayed. But shortly after that, we don't know where it ended up.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing, and I think it goes into what you spoke about in the beginning when you talked about how when we talk about history, how a lot of brothers tend to glaze their eyes over history, and I can say for a good bit of my time in masonry, I could be placed in that category. So it wasn't until being on the show with Dave and James, who taught me how to research, and how you said, history is a trickle down effect, and it's almost like peeling an onion, because once you peel one thing back, you end up finding something else, and it makes you go elsewhere, and you find more things. So just understanding what you're finding through these artifacts, just, talking about Prince Hall's apron, and from the apron you have, this many stories. I mean, it becomes exciting. It excites you because, like you said, these beautiful stories come up, which we did not know if we take the time to peel back that onion and look and see like, wow, I didn't know this. So let me learn about this. And then you find something else. And the more you find out, the more interesting it becomes. So with looking at these artifacts of African Lodge and putting out this publication, what is the main aspect that you want your readers to get from this publication?
Specifically for Prince Hall Freemasons, I want you to take some ownership. And what I mean by that is, I spoke earlier briefly about Celestial Lodge. I think Celestial Lodge in Massachusetts, subordinate to the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, is a very important lodge. It was the continuation of the African Lodge. John J. Smith was the first master of that lodge, created after the formation of the National Grand Lodge. Having said all that, I will not be the brother to write the story of Celestial Lodge. I don't feel that's my place. I could do it. I think I could do a halfway decent job on it, but it would be doing it just to do it. I think if a member of Celestial Lodge wrote the story of Celestial Lodge, it would mean more. There's some ownership to it. I would like for brothers to take on some of that ownership and to share those stories, because I think it's for the membership to do. It's not for just a handful of Prince Hall historians to tell everybody's story. And I've promised brothers, and please take me to task on this. If you don't feel more proud about what you're doing, and if you're not standing a little bit more upright after doing your lodge's history, then we need to sit down and talk. Because if you want to ask me how you get Prince Hall Masons to care a little bit more, take that ownership on, do the work, learn about why it is you're doing what you're doing, and I can assure you'll walk a little more upright. I can't say it enough. There are so many stories that haven't been told regarding Prince Hall Masonry and Prince Hall Masons that are just incredible. Prince Hall Masonry has literally shaped the world we live in today. You can't have a conversation about the Civil War without talking about Prince Hall Masonry. And of course, the fall of the Civil War impacts how we all live today. You can't talk about the Civil Rights era without talking about Prince Hall Masonry. You can't talk about colonialism without talking about Prince Hall Masonry. I've heard some people say some of the stuff needs to be introduced to the public school curriculum. I agree. And it's not to put Masonry in people's faces. It's to say these were some great men who made some great contributions. Again, I would never disparage the memory of Prince Hall, but there are so many other Prince Hall Masons that we have not discussed. Lewis Hayden, for example, forgive me again, I'm a Lewis Hayden fanboy, but you're talking about a slave in Kentucky who becomes messenger to the Secretary of State of Massachusetts. That's a hell of a transformation to go through in your lifetime. And if you were alive today, he would tell you it was because of Prince Hall Freemasonry. The one thing that I've really found about Masonry is you find your voice. You are emboldened. You are educated to a certain extent, but you find your voice, and you realize what it is you're passionate about. Lewis Hayden was very passionate about equality and spent his whole life fighting about equality. Lewis Hayden, I will say, and hopefully prove in my next publication, was the catalyst behind the 54th Regiment and encouraging the federal government to allow black men to fight. Frederick Douglass himself said, if this war is about slavery, then the black man needs to rectify it. That's his battle to fight. And Lewis Hayden made sure that was so. Lewis Hayden left Massachusetts and traveled to Confederate states during the height of the Civil War to get black men to join and fight to defeat slavery in the United States. It was at great risk to himself. And that's part of the story too, is these men weren't impervious to anything that could happen. When Lewis Hayden went to the Confederate States to recruit people for the 54th, the Massachusetts newspapers were reporting, we haven't heard from him in 3 or 4 weeks. We fear he has been captured by the rebels and is dead. And that's an important part of the story, is that as these men did a lot of what they did it at great risk. The men who fought in the war, they had advertisements in the newspaper. Every white officer we capture, it's a bullet in the head. Every black soldier we capture, you're going to get sold deeper south into slavery. I hate to say I enjoy the history, because some of it, like I mentioned, is kind of sad, but I enjoy knowing what those struggles were as much as I can find comfort in knowing that they did address some of those issues. As a society, we're far from perfect. We still have a lot of issues, particularly regarding race, that we really have to address. But it's nice to know that these Prince Hall Masons did, and to the best of their ability, address what they could when they could. And I don't think that should stop. I think we should continue to address those social issues and realize we're all human beings sharing this rock, and we all better get along, because there's really no other option.
All right. Thank you for that, Brother Baptista.
I apologize for getting a little deep there. But...
No, that is perfectly fine. Also, before we start the show, you said you had a presentation as well, and if you want, you can go ahead and go through that.
I don't have a presentation per se. I do have a couple images.
Okay.
I don't know where James went. I do have a full image of Prince Hall's apron I would like to share for those who haven't really had a chance to get a good look at it.
Brothers, I want to apologize. I just found out I was frozen, and I have a funny feeling I'm going to be a Tony James meme tomorrow morning.
Yes, because it was pretty funny. I was laughing on the inside.
I have a funny feeling. Yeah. I didn't realize I was frozen. I'm not going to. That's going to be the new crying Jordan. I bet you.
So this is a photograph that I took September of last year of Prince Hall's apron. This is how it looks today. It's hard to tell, but the Eye of Provenance in the very top center of the image, that was actually done in color, believed to possibly have been painted with watercolor. You have the representation of the sun and the moon up on the top. Of course, African Lodge number 459. I love the dimensionality of the square and compasses. You can see the shadows underneath as if it's hovering just above the apron. And what I found interesting was the apron was actually examined by the Scottish Rite Museum in Lexington, and brought to my attention that the stars are all hand stamped on the apron, which I thought was interesting. As I talk about in the book, it's curious when we talk about Prince Hall's apron, because we know he was in the business of leatherwork. So all I can do is speculate. I can't say anything definitive, but did he make this apron? Did his spouse decorate the apron? Did he at least source the sheepskin to make this apron. I don't know if we'll be able to ever definitively answer any of those questions, but what I can say definitively is no other apron in Boston or the state of Massachusetts at large at that time looks anything like that. So it's definitely a handcrafted creation. It's not a template or anything of that nature. I just think it's darn cool.
Yeah. One thing that I just want to bring out that I find fascinating that as I was reading over it, over the chapter about his stepdaughter presenting his apron, I started thinking about my own incident in my own Grand Lodge's history. And it kind of shows the importance of basically our sisters, our females, and how at times it's like they almost care about our history more than us. I hope I don't step any toes by saying that, but there are certain incidences, such as Dorothy Edwards was the first Grand Worthy Matron of Georgia, and she served as the first Worthy Matron in Georgia. Before the first chapter was even formed, she made the aprons for Eureka Lodge so they could lay a cornerstone. And then later, if I remember correctly, in her obituary, it states that she presented the Grand Lodge with a picture and the first worshipful master in Georgia's gavel. So you start thinking like, okay, how did she have it and not his lodge? I guess they see something maybe like we may have a tendency to just look over it, as you said that the stuff that African lodges stuff had been forgotten about. And maybe they say, okay, we need to hold on to this. So this is pretty important. They don't see how important this is. So I guess that's also just a testament to our women on how they help preserve our history as well.
Absolutely. You can never discount the contribution of the women when it comes to history in general. My wife will always say, why don't you hold on to that? You may not think it's important right now, but why don't you, tuck it away, and one day you might appreciate that you still have that. Absolutely. So thank you definitely to our support system, all the women out there who take care of us.
Absolutely. I think Brother Baptista had a chance to see my wife taking care of me before we started the show. So absolutely, they are our backbone. So, and I think when we talk about that as far as preserving history, there's a lot of sentimental value that we tend to look over, and sometimes we don't look at it as far as how sentimental certain things are, and it's not until later on and you go back and we see it as hindsight being 2020. But I think sometimes it's that intuition of knowing that later on this could definitely be worth something. So definitely have to give praise and honor to our sisters for always being by our side and sometimes looking at the things that we tend to overlook.
And the other thing I'd like to say too is that, just as I said, history trickles down. We have to keep in mind that our present is tomorrow's history. So we need to be as diligent with what we're doing today as we are looking at these artifacts from a couple hundred years ago, because 100, 200 years ago from now, a brother's going to join a lodge and he's going to say, I want to know more about this brother Morgan, this brother Jack, this brother Gilliam. Who were they? What did they do? What were their contributions? Do you have a photograph of them? I think sometimes as historians, we're so caught up in the past, we don't pause and reflect on what we're doing today. So I just want to say it's as important that we preserve what we're doing today as we do these artifacts of African Lodge from a long time ago.
I completely agree with you on that. Artifacts are important, but another important key of your work is the emphasis that you place on place. You place a lot of emphasis on understanding the importance of the locations that the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts and African Lodge, where they were and whatnot. And that's something that really speaks to me when we're dealing with thinking about Masonic sites with the Philaxis Society and whatnot. Can you talk just very, very briefly a little bit about what got you into looking at that aspect of our history as well?
Well, initially it was because as the newest Prince Hall historian knows, his obituary says when he died, he will be delivered from his late dwelling place on Lendell Lane. And I was always curious about that because in the directory at the time, the African Lodge was also listed. It said that the African Lodge met every Tuesday on Congress Street. And being in Massachusetts, having some remedial knowledge of the street layout of Boston, it always seemed too convenient that that's an intersecting corner, Lendell Lane and Congress Street. So I always wondered, are we talking about the same location? So I'm going to say, and what you'll see in the book, the majority of the information I was able to obtain were from newspapers. They weren't from some secret, hidden Masonic archive kept under guard and privileged information. And that's one thing, I'm a little disappointed that as a society we get away from that, because from the inception of African Lodge until, I don't know, 1970s, 1980s, a lot of what was going on Masonically was published in the newspapers. Grand Lodge elections, subordinate lodge elections, even the announcement of meeting nights. These were in newspapers. And that was a tremendous benefit for me to find this information in such a publicly available resource to show that on this evening, the African Lodge held their annual session, and this is the suite of officers that were elected and installed. If you don't have access to the proceedings for that year, or you don't have other resources, chances are that information is still out there. And again, that was, I think, the biggest push to write a book, was to show, again, you can do it. The resources are out there. It's so easy nowadays. I say easy, but a brother asked earlier, I apologize, I forget how long I worked on this. And the answer is about 7 years. 7 years for this short book. But a couple things. First and foremost, you got to make sure you got it right. Because that's important. That's important when what I'm attempting to do is not rewrite history, not by any imagination, but to I don't even want to use the word correct it, to kind of lay it out, to kind of say that this is what happened, and as a result of that happening, this happened, and because this happened, and that happened. And I think you see that flow in the book, how everything that's in the book was consequential of that first fire. But you can do it now much, much, much more easily than any of your predecessors could. And I know I can say that with absolute conviction. We've never been afforded so many resources to look into history.
Absolutely. I think we're ready to go to take some viewer comments and questions. If I'm in order, Brother Gillarm. All right. So yes. I know we had a really good one at the top of the show. Here we go right here. So one of our Prince Hall think tank veterans, Sister Christine Hackett, asks, are you of the belief that the name St. Kendall was an error or misinformation that was spread deliberately? And why do you believe whichever one you believe?
I believe, without any evidence, but my personal belief is a lot of those instances are unintentional. I believe it was an oversight. It's what I said earlier about if you were to lose everything, much like the Prince of Grand Lodge of Rhode Island, you lose all your paper records. 20, 30 years later, somebody might say, well, who was that person that did this, back then? And I think it was an attempt to the best of their ability to provide an answer, or at least that's what comforts me when I lay my head on my pillow at night. I don't see a reason for there to have somebody intentionally misled in that situation. But I also, at the same time, understand that, there's unintended consequences when you correct the record. Because what do you do when there's an organization that shares a name that you find out years later isn't correct? Do you pressure the organization to change the name? Do you just say it is what it is and you go? I don't have an opinion on the matter, and nor am I going to express an opinion on the matter. But what I'm saying is that it can cause some problems later on when the information comes to light.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, to add on something to that, I think, as Brother Baptista said, I believe as well that it was unintentional, but there was something that just happened that kind of shows how easy it was to transmit that ST Kendall name throughout the years, to bring up current events. And y'all know how I am. It's going to be controversial, but y'all know how I do. With Whoopi Goldberg and the brother who went viral for saying that she wore the sweater because she was grieving her brother and she got permission from the lodge, and it turned out to be completely false. But that post or that tweet or whatever he did with it, it was reposted over and over and over, and people passed that on, kept explaining like, oh, she was grieving her brother, oh, she got permission from the lodge, blah, 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 and it was not true. So if that stuff can happen in 2021, you can just imagine how easy it would have been to simply transpose ST Kendall and WB Kendall. So I believe it was unintentional, but there was no fact checking being done, and that story just passed out over the years.
And for some reason, he wasn't incredibly notable during his lifetime. So there aren't a lot of documents or newspaper articles reflecting on William B. Kendall. He is as I say, he's a mention on the stray scraps of history. And again, that's where we are compelled to do our diligence to the best of our ability. Because if we as Prince Hall Masons are making this information available to the public, we're subject to the same thing. We could be unleashing tons of disinformation or incorrect information, or you may have a brother with an axe to grind who may want to, rewrite history or remove somebody from history. So it's important to be transparent, be truthful. And the thing that I always say is, we're not responsible for the past. We're responsible for sharing what we know about the past with the present body and the future. But if you stumble across something that doesn't sit well with you, don't disregard it, because it's still a part of our history. And as I said, it's a trickle down. That event you may not have agreed with and may not want to speak publicly about may have shaped something else in your jurisdiction. So don't discount or try to hide some of the things you may not be that proud of.
Absolutely.
It's all our history. We need to talk about all our history, because that's when you can take a step back. Once you put all the pieces of the puzzle together, you take a step back and then you look at what the picture is. I don't want to look at a picture with a bunch of pieces missing, because you don't know how that could connect to other stories.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. But before we move on to the next question, I thought we were going to get through this episode without mentioning Whoopi Goldberg, because I shouldn't. So, Brother Gillen, what you're telling me is I shouldn't send the email to have her on next month. That's what I thought that she was going to be on. I thought that we were doing the cross brand. I thought she was wearing the sweater, and then we were going to go on, and then we were going to be the View. I thought. No, okay. That's what I was thinking was going to happen. Okay, my bad.
Brother Morgan.
Anyway,
I know you're joking, but it does bring to the forefront, and I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but the last 4 or so years, last administration, one big part of that was a rampant spread of misinformation that has been picked up by a great number of the public, by a lot of news sources, a lot of social media. So it does go to show you that if you scream a falsehood loud enough, a lot of people will believe it.
Right.
And that's why it's more important for us to be diligent about what we're doing, because I could write a work of fiction and pass it off as history, but it's not going to help anybody. So I don't know why anybody would entertain doing something like that. If you're going to put print to page, just take your time, and then when you're done, pass it off. Find another brother that you're comfortable with and has shown that he has some proficiency in that field, and say, can you please look at that? I ask everybody to be nothing but brutally honest with me, because once it's out there, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So you have to deal with it once it's out there. So I just encourage everybody to not only do it, please do it. I'm begging you, please do it. But please have some. It doesn't have to be a brother. Somebody you trust, somebody who has an idea of that period of time or whatever, have them take a look at it. Please ensure you're putting your best foot forward, because this is the foundation somebody else is going to use to put their story together.
Absolutely.
And another real quick thing too is one thing I say to Brother Morgan about all the time is I also wanted to pay particular attention to naming a lot of names you may not have heard, but particularly the spouses and the children of these Prince Hall Masons, because while I'm telling a certain story in a certain context, you might come on as a genealogist and know exactly who I'm talking about, because you know who the spouse was, you know who the children were, and then you may be able to take off into your own venture from that information. So I think it's great when you talk about that other cast of characters, the supporting cast, as opposed to the star of the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And that actually leads into the next question we had. I'm going to modify it just a little bit. But Past Master Bird wants to know, has any of Prince Hall's descendants visited the museum? And by museum, I'm assuming he means Prince Hall Grand Lodge in Massachusetts, that you've seen your research on. So I guess he's trying to find out, do we know anything more about the family of Prince Hall? Are there any living descendants from Clarissa that we know of, or have we done any research in that direction?
The conclusion,
honestly, I think Damien Jack kind of looks like he might be descended from Prince Hall, but that's just my opinion.
The conclusion that I came to with why Clarissa brought the apron to the Prince Hall Grand Lodge was that she simply had no family to pass it on to. Clarissa didn't have any children of her own. She adopted a young girl who I think she was in her mid-40s when Clarissa went to the old ladies' home in Boston, which again, to me, that it was really interesting too, because I didn't know anything about that there was actually an application process she had to go through. She had to show that she was in need. She had to have a sponsor to sponsor her application. It was almost like petitioning to a Masonic lodge for her to receive the social service of being accepted into this old lady's home. But more interesting, her stepdaughter, her adopted daughter, was also brought into the home at the same time because they made an exception to their age requirement and realized this woman was not capable of caring for herself. So the only family Clarissa had at that time was her adopted daughter, and they both moved into the old lady's home at the same time, and both passed away there. So, to my knowledge, I don't believe there are any living descendants of Prince Hall.
Understood. But his spirit definitely lives on in Prince Hall, in the Prince Hall Masonic Order, for both the brothers and the sisters, I think. And I think we also, as you said earlier, need to be uplifting the names of Sylvia and Clarissa as well, to keep that male-female balance going for sure. I'm not seeing too many other questions in the chat, but a lot of folks are very interested in the book. Can you remind everybody where they can get their copy?
Amazon.com.
Excellent.
But Morgan, we did have a question that's kind of at the top. It was by Brother Christopher Leonard.
Okay, I missed that one. Go ahead.
Brother Christopher Leonard asks, what were some of the barriers that could hinder Masonic history and research?
One of the biggest challenges I had early on was making sure you're talking about the right person. It's pretty interesting. I think even the further back we go in history, that we call certain names common names for a reason. There's a lot of Joe Smiths, a lot of Jack Johnsons, so you really have to ensure that, especially when you're looking at it from a genealogical aspect, that you're talking about the right person continuously, that you see the same spouse, you see the same children in every record. Because I had started 7-8 years ago with another project, I think more to do with the history of my lodge, where I had written 35 to 40 pages on a person, only to realize at some point in that process, I had gone from writing about the right person to writing about the wrong person, because they shared a name and they shared a city and state. And I blindly continued until I found that error, and I was able to go back and correct it. So that can be a hang up. Again, I talk a lot about John Smith. You really can't possibly think of a more generic name in America than John Smith. So you really need to make sure every single detail you're putting out about this person's life is the John Smith you want to tell the story of. I mentioned that to that degree because that's a little dangerous. But short of that, I've been tremendously lucky that I've been able to find a puzzle piece that connects a few things. Finding Clarissa for me it meant so much. It still means so much, because she's somebody who had been lost to history completely. And we all owe her a debt of gratitude.
Definitely. And some of the things I see that can hinder research is not knowing where to look. Because I'm pretty sure there's people that plenty of researchers out there. You begin to research something, and you may get told that, oh well, the stuff was secret back then. They didn't talk about as much as stuff that happened in the lodge. And I'm pretty sure, as I'm saying that, somebody's probably nodding their head like, yeah, I've been told that everything was, it was kind of really secretive. But when you start looking at old newspapers, not only did they tell you exactly where the lodge was going to be meeting at, it told you what happened. If it was like Grand Lodge stuff, they would tell you exactly what happened in the session. I know in Georgia, we had the Savannah Tribune. Not only would they tell you exactly where the Grand Lodge was going to be held at, it would tell you what train line to take and the discounts that they got so you could get there. Everything was printed in there. When Prince Hall received We talking about Prince Hall himself when he received African Lodge's charter, and I have a picture of it on my wall in the Dave cave. I don't have a man cave; I have a Dave cave. So he printed it in the paper. He used in today's time. He would have went to Facebook. He went to Twitter. He would have went to Snapchat. He would have did all that and said, "Hey, we got this charter." He did the exact same thing then. So there are tons of stuff that's in newspapers. And one of the best things that I did personally was years ago, probably about 10, 11 years ago. I reached out to brother Brian Carlos Sanchez. You probably heard me mention his name before on the show. He's the founder of the Antediluvian Rite. I reached out to him in regards to an article that Brother Roundtree wrote. I was trying to get a copy of it. And he said, well, why don't you join the Flaxes and then just order all the back editions of the magazine? And so I did. That's exactly what I did. And I ordered all back editions of the Flaxes magazine. And I have them right here at my foot right now. And that was like one of the best things that I could have done. It helped me out with so much research, and then getting lucky. Pretty sure you're gonna see in the next bulletin of the Supreme Council magazine where I write an article about Dr. Deary Vine. I got lucky, as Brother Baptista said. Most of the stuff is just getting lucky. I just so happened to receive a souvenir journal from a granddaughter of a brother that was in my lodge. The brother I never met. He passed on long ago. And the souvenir journal was from 1977. It contained when Dr. Deary Vine was elected commander-in-chief, when he got his 33rd, his first address as commander-in-chief of his consistory, how many members were in there, their addresses, everything about Prince Hall Military Consistory. So, and it was volume 1, edition 1. So it was the very first one, and I happened to get it by luck. So sometimes it's just luck, but other thing, the biggest thing is knowing where to go.
The publicly available sources are so tremendous, and I think they're often overlooked. Again, a conversation I've had quite a bit with Brother Morgan, that I think a lot of newer brothers who have interest in Prince Hall history, they want to look in the minutes. They want to look at the proceedings, and that's where they want to glean their information. And we forget there's a bunch of other resources out there that talk about these individuals and what they did. In Massachusetts, I'm very fortunate that we've always had a free press, and back then, we had Black owned and run newspapers. We had the Liberator out of Boston that always highlighted what was going on in Black society, particularly in Boston. As Brother Gilliam said, after the Civil War, you see these independent Black owned and operated newspapers popping up in Charleston and other cities. And you see this lodge is meeting this night. This is the master of the lodge. This lodge was formed. Oh, now look, this Grand Lodge was formed. It's all in these newspapers. Yes, you do have to use a certain degree of common sense and a certain degree of discretion, knowing that if you're going back into history, there are some racial motivations why certain articles appear in certain newspapers. I do take some pleasure in that, though, because in the time that I've been a Mason, I've heard a lot of conspiracies regarding Freemasonry, but I've only found one to be true, and that was published in a lot of Southern newspapers prior to the Civil War, saying that, we have this suspicion that these members of that African Lodge in Boston are going to form a plan to educate and liberate these Black people of the South. And I do chuckle every time I read that, because I say, yeah, that was a conspiracy. That was absolute historic fact. That was the plan. And that did come out of African Lodge. Again, Lewis Hayden was absolutely instrumental in the formation of the 54th Regiment. And then to establish Masonic lodges in Confederate states during the war. I think that's the ultimate justice.
Absolutely. Let's see if we had any more things, but I think this has been a fascinating discussion, Brother Baptista. And again, I'm so proud for the work that you've done. You're very accomplished in your personal life, and now as an author. And a lot of people don't know that. I'm going to brag on my brother just a little bit. You all are hearing this distinguished voice of his. Outside of being an author, Brother Baptista is a husband, a father, and he's an accomplished voice actor as well. I don't know, real quick, you can let us know a little bit about that aspect of your life as well.
Back in the day, nothing recently, but back in the day, I was very honored and privileged to. I did some voice work for Funimation. If anybody's familiar with them, they do what's called localization. A lot of animated shows over from Japan are brought over to the U.S. They translate the script and bring in a voice cast to voice the characters. And I was very, very fortunate to provide some voices, and it's really something to hear yourself back on television. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, for those who don't know Funimation, that's the company that produces Dragon Ball Z. I had to say that because that's the Dragon Ball Z fan ever growing up, so still am. So
Dragon Ball Z had wrapped prior to any involvement I had with Funimation. So the closest I came was I did get to provide some voices for Dragon Ball GT,
which I think is awesome. Yeah, can y'all see how excited I got about that? I think that's awesome.
But I don't live in Texas, so anybody who is looking to pursue voice acting, one of the biggest rules is you have to live where the work is. If you expect to get a leading role or to make some serious money, living in Massachusetts and traveling to Texas a couple times a year would never afford me an opportunity to have some type of leading role or anything. But again, I'm very, very fortunate to have had that opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah, Christopher Leonard's in here asking about Full Metal Alchemist.
I was in the first iteration of Full Metal Alchemist. You'll hear this voice in episode 5, I believe. I love that show so much. I stopped watching anime after Full Metal Alchemist because I said nothing can top that. I'm done. That's the pinnacle. My sheet fell down. I don't know if you can see my bass guitar. I've got the Elric's symbol on my bass from Full Metal.
Okay. Yeah. We noticed that earlier. Somebody mentioned that they noticed the creature from the Black Lagoon in their background too.
That is, I'm not flexing, I assure you, but that is an original 1950s creature from the Black Lagoon poster. It is signed by the female lead, Julie Adams, and it's signed by what's his name? I forget Ben Chapman, who played the creature, I believe, on land. There were two creatures there. There was a land creature and a sea creature, depending on their talents. The creature in the movie is left uncredited because they wanted people to believe it was a real creature. So the guys who actually wore the latex costumes aren't named in the credits. But Ben Chapman did sign that for me, and I think he passed away like a year after he signed that. So that's a prized possession of mine.
Excellent.
If you don't mind, I would like to show one other document regarding the research for the book. Get my share screen going.
We got some Prince Hall anime fans. Brandon Belton's asking about Cowboy Bebop.
I met the director, the Japanese director, at a convention a few years ago, and he was so gracious. He signed every cover of my DVD collection and the movie. That was kind of my kick for a while, going to anime cons. I started writing articles in anime magazines I wrote for 6 different anime magazines during the height of the anime bubble in the late 90s, early 2000s. That's where I kind of cut my teeth writing and got to meet a lot of very, very, very interesting individuals.
Excellent. All right, let's see here. So you wanted to show us your document?
Is it up on the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I couldn't get a good image in the book of this just because of the layout. So I just wanted to show those who are in attendance this evening here where we have, this is Clarissa Madison's death record. And we have Clarissa Madison colored, maiden name, the MN here, Hall. And at the very end, where it lists the parents, although he was not her biological father, Prince is given as a name of her father, and of course Sylvia as her mother. So I just wanted to put that out there and say that I'm pretty darn confident that is Prince Hall's stepdaughter. I don't see how anybody could come to a conclusion other than that. So I just wanted to show a little bit of my work in that regard before anybody asks, well, how do you know? How can you say that if she's never been mentioned before?
Awesome. Well, I'm convinced.
Yeah,
I don't know about you, brothers.
definitely. And I believe Brother
Absolutely.
Jack had something else he wanted to ask in regards to the punch bowl.
Oh, yes, there was actually a brother who wanted to, he couldn't get on the chat. So he sent me an inbox and he wanted to know more about the statement accompanying the bowl donated by Clarissa, if time permitted. So whatever statement that came along with the bowl, if there was more information on that. And this is coming from Marion Bell.
So in 1866, as I said, it was the culmination of the annual session at the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in Massachusetts. Lewis Hayden installed Most Worshipful Grand Master. John James Smith installed treasurer. The first presentation that was made to the Grand Lodge was by M.P. Green, who was the granddaughter of, I believe it was Boston Smith, who was an original petitioner of the Charter for African Lodge 459, and she presented a banner to African Lodge 459, and after her presentation is when Clarissa made the presentation of the punch bowl, the apron, and the gavel. To my knowledge of those artifacts I mentioned, the only one that has been retained is the apron. I don't recall ever seeing the banner. I don't think anybody in the Grand Lodge could recall what may have ever happened to that banner. As I said, with the gavel, John Smith held on to it for a long time, and then it just kind of disappears. The punch bowl is probably the most interesting of the artifacts because in my experience thus far, that is the only mention of the punch bowl. I haven't found any other mention in public records or any records in the possession of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts.
Gotcha.
But what I find most telling about that story is saying this large and elegant punch bowl brought to this country by Prince Hall. So I don't know if that helps in his biography of whether or not he may have been born in the United States.
Gotcha.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for that. And I see that we're now at 10 o'clock, so the hour is definitely well spent. And we're going to go ahead and, get started with wrapping up this show. So we're going to go ahead and get our parting comments. And I believe we're going to go ahead and start with Brother Baptista.
Again, I want to thank you, brothers, for providing this platform, not just for me, but for everybody who has an interest in these topics, which can be very broad and ranging at times. I, in particular, have really enjoyed these shows. And like I said, the November episode left a tremendous impact on me as a brother, as a historian, as somebody who wants to share information and help guiding me on perhaps the best way to do that. Again, I can't say it enough. You can do it. You can tell wonderful and beautiful stories, and you might need somebody to give you a push in the right direction. I thank Brother Morgan for that at least once a week for pushing me, because I don't know if I would have done it without a push. You have to remember that sometimes you get a little lost in the story yourself, where you might think, but this isn't that important. Who would want to know about this? Or, oh, it's not a very long or a very substantial body of work. Maybe it doesn't warrant a publication. Get it all out there. Get it all out there. It only helps to explain more of our history. And I do truly believe our history, to a certain extent, does dictate where we're going in the future. Please don't ever look at the history of the fraternity as boring or uninspiring. I think it's just the opposite. I've never been more proud to be a Prince Hall Mason than when I look at the contributions of all the Prince Hall Masons that came before me. And I can only hope that I could do half as good a job as laying down a foundation for those brothers who come after me.
Thank you for that, Brother Baptista. And I can tell you from my own personal comments in the historian group, like, you be blowing my mind sometimes. And I think I've called Brother Brother Morgan, like, who is this brother? Like, this dude's be going in. Because the stuff that you post about the 54th, like where Prince Hall house was, and then to be able to show pictures, like, okay, it was right here. This is where his house was located. And you do some outstanding research, brother. I mean, I can't say that enough. You do some outstanding research.
Thank you. And again, I can't say it enough. There's no secret. There's no key. There's no room at my Grand Lodge that houses all this mysterious information. It really comes down to how much time are you willing to put into it? In some cases, how much of your own money are you willing to put into it? Because some of these subscription services aren't cheap. And I guess, how much do you want to know? I know this might sound weird, but I think some brothers might agree with me. I wrote the book for me, and it's a privilege that I'm able to share it with everybody else. But I wanted to answer these questions, and I would have answered these questions regardless. And I'm grateful that there's a platform that I have to share this information. But you can, in most cases, you're not going to find the answers to everything. Some stuff, unfortunately, is lost to history. But stick to it, because the reward of just getting that answer can mean so much. And I will keep beating that horse. Absolutely. Please, if you have an excuse on why you haven't done your lodge's history or done your Grand Lodge's history or your own family history or whatever, please, shoot me an email or send me a text or something, because I want to challenge you on that. I want to tell you, you can do it. You can get those answers. And for the last time, I'll say, once you have those answers, I defy you to tell me you're not walking a little more upright.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Brother Jack.
Well, as always, outstanding show, Brother Baptista. Thank you for honoring us with your presence. Thank you for putting in the work to putting out this publication. Thank you for everything that you have taught us this evening. I know that I'm definitely better for it. Definitely looking into diving into more of not just history, but artifacts, because we, understand that there are, certain objects that can, tell an amazing story. So thank you so much to our audience. Thank you as always for taking the time out to come and view the show and give your comments and questions. You could be doing anything in the world, but you decided to give the most precious thing that God has given, and that is your time to come and learn more about Prince Hall Masonry. So thank you so much. Definitely want to give a shout out to the creator of our show, Past Master Caffey. Please get well soon. We definitely missed you, but we know we're watching and enjoying the show. So until next time, continue to stay safe out here. Do what you can to be safe, wear your mask, social distance, and we'll see you again next month.
Thank you for that, Brother Jack. Brother Morgan?
Oh man! First of all, I want to know who is this brother here, and what has he done with Steve Baptista? Because I can look. I'm gonna embarrass him for a quick second. I can remember some days and some nights when we were talking at before the book was even really getting in the high gear, and it was like pulling teeth. I'm like, brother, you got the information. He's like, oh man, I don't know, but he buckled down and got it done, and I'm so proud of you, Brother Baptista. There's certain people that I call during certain times of the day or what have you, and so Brother Baptista knows this. Usually, I hate to say this, but in my mind, I call certain people my radio channels. So, like Brother Baptista knows, I usually call him right after work, and literally, I will be leaving my office, and he and I will talk as I get on the subway, and I all the way to my door, and then I get home, and I say, all right, brother, I'll talk to you later. But that's how my involvement, as far as our conversations go with this book. I am so proud of you and the work you've done. This is just amazing. I do want to give a shout out to my most worshipful Grandmaster, the Honorable Quincy G. Gant, because he and I, like I said earlier, we had a conversation about this work and whatnot, and my involvement with it and everything. And I wanted to thank him for allowing me to participate with this work, which I believe will be read for generations to come. I did want to embarrass Brother Baptista a little bit, and I wanted to read the ending, the last paragraph, just very quickly, of the forward that I wrote, because I think it really encapsulates how important this book is to me, and really what I think it should mean to all members of the Prince Hall Masonic family. And it says this: it should not be lost on readers that as important as these artifacts are, Brother Baptista has also performed the thankless and Herculean task of literally tracing the footsteps of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts and its antecedent, the original African Lodge. By detailing the several relocations of this Grand Lodge, us an excellent example of how, through the generations, Prince Hall Freemasonry, and by proxy the African American community, has been looking for safe space to grow and thrive. This work is a testament to the fact that although the environment may not have always nourishing to the soul of Prince Hall Freemasonry, it has achieved much growth in spite of its enemies. The gavels, the aprons, the bricks, and the spaces herein described have long been as silent witnesses and totems of memory to the history of Prince Hall Freemasonry. Thanks to the work of this intrepid Masonic researcher, they are silent no more. It is now up to us to listen to the stories and lessons that they have to share. Make sure y'all get this book, please. It's very important to have in your library. And with that, thank you all.
Man, that last line is so deep. I'm gonna put that up there with the opening line from Lois Hayden's letter to James Sims in I believe 1874, where basically he says that now the slavery is now passing away, and so it's becoming our duty as colored men to educate our people. And that's paraphrasing what he's saying. And that line, I read that so much, and that is what that last sentence of what you just said. It's now up to us to listen to these stories that all these artifacts are telling us. So thank you for that, Brother Morgan. I know all of us we got so much stuff going on. you also have a lot of stuff going on with the Civil War Museum. Is that not mistaken? You have a couple programs coming up.
Yes, sir. Yes, I do. I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because I know one of them tomorrow I know you'd be very interested in personally. As many of you know, I work with the African American Civil War Museum here in Washington, D.C., with Dr. Frank Smith, who's also a Prince Hall Mason, who was the founder of the museum, by the way. He's a member of D.C. Jurisdiction Redemption Lodge 24, where my Grand Master's a member. We are having a series of events this month. I'll post them in the Prince Hall Think Tank group. But the first one is actually tomorrow. It will be the Bishop Henry McNeil Turner Symposium with Dr. Andre Johnson, Dr. Jean Lee Cole, and myself. We'll be talking about the life and legacy of Bishop Henry McNeil Turner. I'm actually going to be talking about his Masonic life, so I hope our audience will take a peek at that. I'll make sure to post the links in the Zoom. I mean, in the Prince Hall Think Tank group and on our social media. Other events we have on Thursday, we have Chris Haley, Reflections on Roots. Chris Haley is the nephew of Alex Haley, so he'll be talking about that. February the 9th, we have Dr. Gabrielle Foreman, and Dr. Derek Spires talking about the color conventions. And all my Prince Hall Masonic historians should know or do know about the Color Conventions Project website. When we talk about Grand Lodge proceedings, we can also see where some of our folks were involving themselves in politics outside of the lodge. So if you're not familiar with that site, definitely check that out. And then at the end of the month, February 25th, we have Miss Yvette Legantry talking about a family, the Clark family, which was enslaved for several generations at the Georgetown Hotel here in D.C. So like I said, I'll put all those links and information in the Prince Hall Think Tank group if it's not already there. And I definitely hope to see everybody there, especially tomorrow night, because I'm going to talk a little bit about Bishop Turner's Masonic life. So I know Brother Gillarm, I know you're going to be sitting there. He's going to have his notepad. If I mess up anything, he's going to jump in. I know it.
No, I'll definitely be tuned in tomorrow. I'll be traveling. So anybody that's friends with me on Facebook, you'll see where I'm going and stuff tomorrow. But as always, hope everybody enjoyed the show. There's been the links to purchase this book, Artifacts of the Old African Lodge, has been posted several times in the chat, and we can repost it in the Prince Hall Think Tank Facebook group as well for you, and hopefully you purchase it. Also, for the viewers, just because the show ends doesn't mean the conversation has to end. So feel free to, once you pick up the book or once you get it, or if you already have it and you've read it, feel free to add your comments to the group. We can continue the conversation for weeks to come. We can continue the conversation for as long as you want to. And it's not just this show, any show that we had. Feel free. If you watch, you have some questions, you have some comments about it, post those questions, post those comments. We're going to answer them. That's the whole purpose of this group. That's what we do. That's what we're here for. We're here so all of us can learn together. So once again, just because the show ends doesn't mean the conversation has to end. And with my parting comments, I got a y'all already know what's about to happen. I got a text from Brother Caffey. He said,
all right, everybody. All right.
He said,
good night. All right.
He said the real reason why he couldn't be on the show tonight is because, unfortunately, the Knicks lost to the Clippers today, so he was sad. He was so distraught that he didn't feel that he could just be on the show tonight. I tried to console him and tell him like everything is gonna be okay. We have the #1 defense in the NBA. So Pass Master Bird, I know you hear that. We have the #1 defense in the NBA right now, and I wear my shirt, my Knicks hoodie. So yeah, we will be okay moving forward. So that's what it is. That's why he couldn't. That's the real reason why he couldn't be here.
I could have swore we just talked about fake history. Like seriously?
Right. So right now we're gonna do something first time ever. Your homework, brother, past master, Brother Damian Jack. Cause I know you from Harlem, right?
Absolutely.
I need you to run up top to Harlem, knock on the door of the Apollo, get Sandman, and next episode, next month, we're gonna have to. I need you to do that for us, please.
all day. I got you.
Yes, sir.
Well, as always, we hope you enjoyed the show. We hope you learned something. If it was just one thing that you was able to take away, hope you were able to take away something. And we look forward to seeing you next month. That's all. Everybody have a good night and stay safe.